Growing up in Sunday school, I was taught from the Bible, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed.
Let's look at this article from Sarah Jones called The Radical Past and Future of Christian Zionism. And this is important because one might wonder, we talked about this before, but why is it the case that a lot of people whose entire worldview involves an incredibly literalistic interpretation of the New Testament, one that's been mediated via the televangelical community and consumer capitalism, why have a lot of those same people been so radically involved in and supportive of the Zionist project? Why have they been so radically supportive of the activity of the Israeli military? Because if those people are super, super Christian, wouldn't they think that their friends that only believe in the first half of the book are not on their team? Now, I talked about this recently, and if you're not familiar with this logic, I promise I'm not making this up. There is a brand of American evangelical Christian who quite literally believes that there needs to be a war in the Holy Land so that Jesus will come back and snatch them up and take them to hang out with his dad. That is a real thing that people believe. And it's not a fringe belief. A lot of people believe this. And a lot of people that have positions of power in our government believe this. So when they see bombs raining down over the Middle East, when they see war popping off between Iran and Israel, what they see is an increase in the odds that a holy war will shake Christ from his cosmic slumber to bring him back to take all of the good white American Christians home to the Bass Pro Shops in the sky. Shouts to you if you like that. I don't think that there's nothing, totally wrong with Bass Pro Shops. I didn't mean that in a disrespectful way. If you are a fisherman, if you're a canoeer, I think that's all cool, and I respect you for doing it. So that's where we're at. But let's look a little bit at this article right here. Let's get educated for a bit before we talk to Tom. So it says, days before the Trump administration bombed 3 nuclear sites in Iran, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas tried to defend his unblinking support of Israel by telling Tucker Carlson that the Bible gives him no other choice. Now, we looked at this clip on the show.
Growing up in Sunday school, I was taught from the Bible, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed.
We've talked about this. It was an all-time absurd moment in political interviews where Ted Cruz used a verse about defending the people of Israel, which refers to the descendants of Abraham, and used that as a reasoning for why it's cool to bomb people. Tucker Carlson, one of the worst people ever, just 3 pre-cum babies in one, pushed him on that, I guess rightfully so, and pointed out that it's theologically incoherent POV. Jones writes here that Christian Zionism is not a new phenomenon, and it can't take all the credit for the United States' bloody foreign policy, but it's once again salient as Donald Trump surrounds himself with evangelicals who profess the ideology, and he pays lip service to it, as he does other popular evangelical convictions. Again, Trump's one of those, it's weird, surrounds himself with evangelicals, yet is not one. Now I've glazed FD and Bass Pro Shops. I'm crazy. You can't hold me on. I'm sure that what FD did, though, is he probably talked me into talking shit about Nebula, and then he got on the line because he has a special thing on his phone to talk to Dave Wiskus immediately. And he's like, I got a new person on the all-time ban list. Many Christian Zionists are influenced by dispensationalism, a relatively new doctrine that bestows the fate of Israel with prophetic significance. And it's important, too, that a lot of the stuff that someone like a Ted Cruz will be like, it's in the Bible. Tucker, it's there. I don't know where, Tucker, but it's there, Tucker. They use the Bible, or it's in the Bible, to signify that there is a historically built theology, that this is something that relates to a coherent narrative in the interpretation of Scripture. But tis not the case. The end times are nigh. Israel's a key role to play in Armageddon. These are ideas popularized by the Left Behind series. Shout out to anyone who's ever watched that. If you want to do something really bad, you shouldn't do this. But if you grew up evangelical, rent a cabin, get some hallucinogens, and watch the Left Behind movies while on those. So Sarah Jones here talks to Daniel Hummel of the Lumen Center, which is, I think that's a Severance-related thing, in Madison, Wisconsin, about his book, Covenant Brothers, Evangelicals, Jews, and U.S.-Israeli Relations and History of Christian Zionism. We're not going to read this whole thing, and I'm going to put the link to this article in the chat right now so you guys can check it out later. And I do think if this is a thing you're interested in, Sarah Jones's work is about, if I'm not going to say like as good as it gets, it's as good as it gets in terms of someone who really keeps up on this stuff and is constantly elucidating and explaining the relations between these things in a way that I think is really helpful. So, you know, I don't know Sarah Jones, but shout out to Sarah Jones. So it starts with, she asked him about the idea of dispensationalism. And this is what Professor Dr. Daniel Hummel says. Dispensationalism is a system of theology that's quite popular among conservative Protestants. It started in the early 19th century on the fringes of dissenter Protestantism in Great Britain. I always forget that a lot of the weirdest parts about American Christianity come from like the worst British people that were too weird theologically for Britain, so that they came over here and started doing all types of weird shit. We'll yell at Tom for that when he pops on the show. When John Nelson Darby broke from the Church of England and founded the Plymouth Brethren sect, he developed a way of reading the Bible that led to a distinct set of teachings about who Israel is, who the church is, and for the sake of simplicity, what the future holds based on the Bible. Okay, so they argue that God has two chosen people. And again, this theology involves the overarching belief that there is such a thing as God, and that God decided that there's good guys and there's bad guys, and invites you to construct a theology by which you are one of the good guys. You know, I don't hate on religious belief. I participate in religious belief in my life, but I just think if for you theology boils down to like there's a good team and a bad team, and here's how I'm on the good team. If there was an all-knowing cosmic being, I think it would be more interesting than that. Is all that I'm saying. Shouts to Thanos. So there's two groups of people. One of those is Israel, and one is the church. And of course, like the church for these people always means like their church. You know what I mean? Like the Catholics don't count because they're too woke now or something like that. What a world too, where the type of American evangelical that has a ton of political pull thinks that the Catholics are too woke. The payoff is that any prophecies relating to Israel in the Old Testament prophets, or wherever Israel is mentioned, are referencing the ethnic Israel, what we call the Jewish people today. The church is to gather all Gentiles to God to follow him. Then at some point soon, God will hit unpause on his plans with Israel. Yeah, so God was like doing all this stuff in the Old Testament, and then he got really tired. So he hit pause. And now he's gonna unpause. And this will launch the rapture, which will take away the church from the world. This is, again, a thing that a lot of people believe. You might not know these people, but the thing that these people believe is that God is going to come back in a golden chariot, and he's going to take the good guys with him, and he's going to leave the bad guys behind. You could watch this in the Left Behind series. If I understand correctly, there was the original Left Behind trilogy starring Kirk Cameron, and then I think Nicolas Cage was in a Left Behind film. I'm not going to confirm that fact right now. If someone wants to Google fact check and see if that is the case, you can absolutely do that. Okay. We'll read a little bit more of this. It says dispensationalism, at least as I learned about it, also holds that the end time events will happen in a specific order. So yeah, so there's all the certain dominoes will fall. Let's see. Okay, so then he gets into Left Behind. This stuff is very real. Hummel says many pro-Israel evangelicals talk about Israel in ways that aren't entirely theological. They're more cultural or geopolitical. They love talking about Israel as a democracy. Israel as a beacon of Western values, Judeo-Christian values. So all these things are working together. There's been a deliberate effort by evangelical activists, including pastors, to forge a political relationship around these ideas, one that's very narrowly focused on generating U.S. support for Israel or domestic support in the U.S. for pro-Israel policies. That has been the change. I mean, what we see in many ways here is American, like the American evangelical political project at this point is just straight up raw, unprotected imperialism. These people love free markets. These people love traditional Western values. These people love foreign intervention. It's just the full-on America fuck yeah project. And, you know, it's very hard to find theological grounds for any of this. There is I'm going to pull up something on the old phone that I saw earlier today. See if I can find it. Yeah. This is from Leviticus. There's a verse in Leviticus, which is in the Old Testament, that says, "Do not mistreat foreigners living in your country, but treat them as you treat your own citizens. Love foreigners as you love yourselves, because you were foreigners one time in Egypt. I'm the Lord your God." So in the book that these people think is very important, there is a verse where God directly says, "Do not mistreat foreigners living in your country, but treat them just as you treat your own citizens. Love foreigners as you love yourselves." So the people that are really obsessed with the necessary existence and truth of that book are the same people in many ways who are supporting putting those foreigners in a concentration camp in the Everglades surrounded by alligators. That's where we're at. That these people, many of whom who think that the evangelical Christianity is true, that there's a truth to the Israeli project, and they see that in the Torah, the Old Testament. There's so much stuff in that book about this. And I say this, it's kind of cliche. We all know this at this point. The important thing to note here is that for these folks, their primary motivation is not a lived belief in some theological narrative that comes from the Old and New Testament. The real vibe here, the real thing these people are going for, is like American militarism and nationalism with a side dish of white supremacy and a sprinkle of free market magic. Stuff is way more Ayn Randian or Richard Spencerian than it is theologically grounded. But again, the annoying thing is it doesn't matter though. Like, you could go up to any of the, evangelical influenced leaders who are part of the Trump administration and be like, "Hey, but you like the book that you like so much says this thing," and they'll tell you like why it doesn't matter. They're very good at doing that. So here Jones says, "There's no hard and fast line for this, but in the 80s, we saw the formulation of what we think of as today's Christian right around a backlash to abortion rights, perceived liberalization of society. How does Christian Zionism become part of that?" And of course, we get real pimps like Jerry Falwell, Tim LaHaye, the guy that wrote the Left Behind novels. They created the Religious Roundtable, which is not a pizza chain. One thing they did was to merge this ongoing dispensationalist view of talking about Israel and the church with their critique of American society. The big battle for them was that there's this Christian worldview, and then there's a secular worldview, and the Christian worldview needs to come out on top. They conscripted Israel as part of this Judeo-Christian tradition. Israel became the dominant representation of the Jewish part of the Judeo-Christian world. And you can also see, too, that elements of this Judeo-Christian world conveniently leave out another really popular monotheism that's grounded in the same text. Conveniently, they leave that one out. Conveniently, these same people then participate in going to war against countries that might be known for having dominant populations that practice the other monotheism. And, Jones then brings up 9/11. How can you not bring up 9/11? She says, "I was quite young then, but I do remember thinking that the end times were finally upon us. Can you explain the significance of 9/11 to Christian Zionist?" Just a reminder that I'm working on a video on conspiracy theories that's coming out pretty soon. So, gets at some of this stuff. This is one way to frame it. There was a sort of interregnum period in the 90s. 9/11 seemed to signal that we were in a clash of civilization scenario where there were clear lines between a Judeo-Christian world and a Muslim world. I mean, this is the same thing you kind of see going on now with the weird alliance of the US and Israel against Iran. This sort of like, there's the Judeo-Christian West with a certain set of values, and then there's the crazy those other guys. They're the real bad ones. It's wild that we still fall for this stuff. It's not good. I'm just going to scroll ahead a little bit here. And then in this book, this guy talks about Benjamin Netanyahu, shouts to our Philadelphia king. Isn't that where he's from? Isn't Netanyahu from Philly, Pennsylvania, or something like that? The basic gist here is that Netanyahu has been game to do this. He's been game to like build alliances with people who are basically like we want your country to go into a state of holy war so that Jesus will come back and take us and not you. And he's like, great. Because they funnel money there. Of course, interesting thing here that Jones brings up, there's a Christian tradition in Palestine that's extraordinarily old. Yeah. Though I never heard anything about it when I was an evangelical. What sort of relationship do Christian Zionists have with Palestinian Christians? And this is the thing people will bring up, that like evangelical Christians who like won't go to a cake shop if the cake maker isn't Christian, or won't go to a cafe if they let gay people have birthday parties there, will have a radical geopolitical alliance with, a Jewish state, but then don't have that same level of solidarity, let's say, with people that practice their faith in Palestine. And of course, the author says there's not much of a direct relationship. Some of it has to do with Sword of Israel, some with Christian or evangelical theology, some have to do with American biases and blind spots. Many American evangelicals side with the Israeli narrative on a couple of key things, like whose land is Israel. Evangelicals believe that God covenanted this land with the Jewish people, so it's their land. So they're kind of like, God is our favorite landlord, so we rock with the people who live in property owned by our favorite landlord, not necessarily the people who we have a more, straightforward geopolitical or theological allegiance with, And yeah, I mean, it gets into this too, but like, a lot of the evangelical Zionist community does their own like weird little birthright trips where they'll do sponsored trips to Israel and, get a view of the Holy Land that doesn't involve interacting with Palestinian Christians. So yeah, you guys can check this out. I'm going to post the link again, but I think it's important to understand this because some stuff that sounds really goofy to us, let's say, is pretty freaking influential to some of the freaks we don't like Mr. Ted Cruz right here. Ted Cruz, indeed.